Admiral Jake Harrison stood in the command center of Earth's largest space station, looking at the screens that showed alien ships from across the galaxy. His gray hair was cut short like all military men, and his blue eyes held the weight of a decision that would change everything. The holographic display before him showed the Galactic Council chambers on Nexus Prime, where creatures from 800 different worlds gathered to make laws for everyone. Dr. Lisa Morgan watched from her lab on the same station, her hands shaking as she read the latest message from the Council. She had spent 10 years studying alien life, learning their languages and customs, believing that humanity could find its place among the stars through cooperation. Now she saw how wrong she had been. The Council did not want partners. They wanted servants. The blue-skinned Zalarian ambassador appeared on the main screen. His forearms moving in what humans had learned was a gesture of absolute authority. His voice came through the translators with cold precision. The human species will comply with Galactic Standard Protocol 7.3 within 30 Earth days or face complete isolation from all civilized worlds. The alien's large, black eyes showed no emotion as he continued. Your expansion into the outer rim sectors must cease immediately. Your artificial intelligence technology must be surrendered to Council oversight. Your population growth must be limited according to our calculations of sustainable galactic resources. Captain Ryan Bell felt his jaw tighten as he listened from the bridge of his ship, the Earth Defense Vessel Guardian. He had fought pirates and raiders in the outer systems, protecting human colonies that were just trying to build new lives among the stars. Now the Council wanted to take those worlds away, calling them buffer zones that would be given to other species. 12 colony worlds where millions of humans had made their homes, where children had been born under alien suns. President Karen White sat in her office in Geneva, surrounded by advisors who all looked as grim as she felt. The Council's demands had been growing stronger each year since humanity first made contact with galactic civilization. At first, they had seemed reasonable. Join the Council, follow some basic rules, and enjoy the benefits of trade and protection. But the rules kept changing, always asking for more, always taking something away. The Galactic Council had existed for over 50,000 years, long before humans had even learned to farm. Ancient species like the Ethereals and the Threnodi, Empire had built it to maintain order across the galaxy, to prevent wars and manage resources. But somewhere along the way, it had become something else. It had become a tool for the old species to control the young ones, to make sure no new power could rise to challenge them. Jake Harrison had been there when the first human ship had reached the galactic core worlds 25 years ago. He remembered the wonder in Captain Adams' voice as he described cities that floated in space, beings of pure energy, and technologies that seemed like magic. Humanity had been so eager to learn, so ready to become part of something greater. They had signed the Council agreements without reading the fine print, trusting that advanced civilizations would be wise and fair. The mistakes became clear over time. The Council's guidance on human development had slowed their progress in space travel. Their suggestions about human culture had tried to make Earth more like the sterile core worlds. Their recommendations about human military forces had left colonies vulnerable to attack from species that did not follow the same rules. Lisa Morgan pulled up her research files, showing the results of years spent studying Council member species. The pattern was always the same. Young civilizations joined with hope and excitement, drawn by promises of knowledge and protection. Within a few generations, they became dependent on council technology and resources. Their own innovations stopped. Their cultures faded into bland copies of approved galactic standards. They became servants who called themselves citizens. Ryan Bell had seen it happening to humanity, too. Earth's best scientists were being recruited to work on council projects, their discoveries disappearing into bureaucratic committees. Human colonies were being assigned council advisors, who seemed to have more authority than the elected governors. Human military units were being integrated into council forces, their loyalty slowly shifting from Earth to Nexus Prime. The breaking point had come 3 months ago. A council inspection team had arrived at the Mars Research Facility, where Dr. Sophie Hayes was working on new medical technology that could extend human life by decades. The aliens had confiscated her work, claiming it violated galactic population control agreements that humans had never signed. When Sophie protested, they had arrested her and taken her to stand trial on a world where humans could not even breathe the air. That was when President White had called Admiral Harrison to her office for a private meeting. "Jake," she had said, using his first name like she had when they were both young officers, "how long can we keep pretending this is a partnership?" Harrison had been thinking the same thing. The council treated humanity like children who needed constant supervision. They made laws that applied only to humans while exempting their favorite species. They demanded access to human technology while refusing to share their own advances. They spoke of galactic peace while building up their military forces in human space. The decision had not been easy. Earth was one small planet in a galaxy of trillions of worlds. The Council controlled trade routes, had massive fleets, and could make life very difficult for any species that opposed them. But humanity had some advantages, too. Their technology was more advanced than the Council wanted to admit. Their military tactics were unpredictable. Most importantly, they were not alone in their frustration with Council rule. Lisa Morgan had made contact with scientists from other species, beings who were also growing tired of Council restrictions on their research. Some were from older civilizations that remembered what freedom felt like. Others were from younger species that had joined the Council more recently and were starting to see the pattern. There was a network of dissent growing across the galaxy, hidden from Council surveillance, waiting for someone to make the first move. Ryan Bell had similar connections among military officers from different worlds. They met quietly during joint exercises, sharing stories about how the Council's rules made no sense for actual combat. The hegemony forces were brutal, but effective. The Threnody used tactics that required strict hierarchy, but humans fought best when they could think for themselves, adapt quickly, and take risks that computers could not calculate. The final preparations had taken weeks. Earth's space defenses were quietly upgraded. Secret communication networks were established with every human colony. Stockpiles of food, medicine, and raw materials were hidden in places the Council did not know about. Most importantly, alliances were built with species that might support humanity when the moment came. Now that moment was here. Admiral Harrison looked at the faces on his command staff, men and women who had sworn to protect Earth and all her children. They knew what this decision meant. The Council would not accept defiance. There would be consequences, possibly including war, but there came a time when the cost of freedom was worth paying. "Open a channel to all Council worlds," Harrison said to his communications officer. "Full broadcast, emergency priority." The young lieutenant's hands moved across his controls, linking Earth's transmission systems to the galactic network. In seconds, Harrison's voice would reach every civilized World in the galaxy. Representatives from 800 species would hear humanity's answer to 50,000 years of galactic law. Harrison straightened his uniform and looked directly into the camera. "Citizens of the galaxy," he began, his voice steady and clear, "I am Admiral Jake Harrison, speaking for the people of Earth and all human colonies. After careful consideration of the Galactic Council's latest demands, humanity formally withdraws from the Council effective immediately. We reject your authority over our sovereign worlds and will defend our right to exist as free beings. This transmission ends all diplomatic relations between humanity and the Galactic Council." The silence that followed lasted exactly 4.7 seconds. Then chaos erupted across the galaxy as 800 species tried to understand what the humans had just done. Some called it madness, others called it courage. But everyone knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Earth had severed ties with the Galactic Council, and the galaxy held its breath. The first reaction came from the Threnody Empire exactly 11 minutes after Admiral Harrison ended his transmission. Ambassador Vexhai, a creature that looked like a cross between a spider and a tree, transmitted from his home world with what the translators could only describe as rage. "The humans have lost their minds," his mechanical voice declared to the emergency council session. "They cannot survive without our protection and guidance. This is suicide disguised as independence." On Earth, President Karen White stood before the cameras in the United Nations building, her face calm despite the storm she knew was coming. Behind her, the flags of every human nation hung side by side, a reminder that humanity had learned to work together long before they met the stars. "My fellow humans, both on Earth and on the colony worlds," she began. "Today we have chosen a difficult path. We did not make this decision lightly, but we could not continue to live as subjects in our own galaxy." The president's words were broadcast to every human settlement, from the mining stations on asteroids to the farming colonies on distant worlds. On New Angeles, a planet where human families had lived for 3 generations, Governor Lisa Park gathered her people in the main square. The faces looking back at her showed fear mixed with pride. They knew the council might cut off their supplies, might even send ships to force them back into line. But they also knew they were no longer alone. Commander Alex Turner watched from the bridge of his ship, the Earth starship Liberty, as alien vessels began leaving human space. Some departed quietly, their crews probably confused by orders from home. Others lingered, their sensors scanning human defenses and sending data back to their governments. The worst were the hegemony ships, dark hulls that seemed to absorb light, hanging in space like threats waiting to be carried out. The galactic communication network lit up with thousands of messages as news of Earth's withdrawal spread. On Harmony Station, the Council's main meeting place, Chancellor Zephyros of the Ethereal Collective called an emergency session. The Ethereals were beings of pure energy who had guided galactic affairs for thousands of years, believing themselves to be the wisest species in the galaxy. Now they faced something they had not expected: open defiance from a species they considered primitive. Dr. Sophie Hayes, recently rescued from council custody by a daring human operation, worked frantically in her laboratory on Mars. Her research into life extension technology had been the excuse the council used to arrest her, but that was not the real reason. Through her contacts in the scientific community, she had learned that several council species had been secretly studying human technology for years. They wanted to understand what made humans so adaptable, so creative, so difficult to predict and control. The economic effects began within hours. The Galactic Stock Exchange on Nexus Prime crashed as traders tried to figure out what humanity's withdrawal would mean for trade routes and resource supplies. Many species had grown dependent on human goods without realizing it. Earth produced medicines that worked better than alien alternatives. Human engineers built machines that lasted longer and needed fewer repairs. Human farmers had developed new crops that could grow on worlds where nothing else would survive. More importantly, human ships carried goods between species that refused to deal with each other directly. The proud Zalarians would not trade with the aggressive Korthak. The mysterious void whales would only sell their precious memory crystals to human merchants. Without human intermediaries, dozens of important trade relationships would collapse. Captain Nina Rodriguez commanded the defense fleet around the Europa colony, where ice miners extracted water for the entire outer rim. She watched her sensors as Council ships took positions just outside the system, not quite an invasion, but clearly a threat. The aliens were testing human resolve, waiting to see if Earth would really fight to protect its people, or if this was all empty words. On the core worlds, panic spread among species that had never imagined the galaxy without Council control. The Quillians, bird-like creatures who handled most galactic communications, found their networks overwhelmed with messages from worried governments. The crystal-based resonance, who maintained the hyperspace routes that made faster-than-light travel possible, began receiving demands for increased security as species worried about human raiders. But not all reactions were negative. Dr. Emma Stone, monitoring communications from her research station on Europa, intercepted thousands of coded messages from younger species expressing support for Earth's decision. The Novari, who had only joined the Council 50 years ago, sent secret transmissions congratulating humanity on their courage. The plant-like Verdani, whose home world had been strip-mined by Council decree, wished they had the strength to follow Earth's example. President Nathan Brooks, who had been White's vice president, found himself dealing with the immediate crisis as White worked on long-term strategy. His office was flooded with calls from human colony governors, some afraid and asking for protection, others excited and ready to declare their own independence. Brooks had to balance their fears with the reality that Earth could not protect everyone at once. The military situation was more complex than most people realized. Captain Danny Price, in charge of training new recruits, knew that human forces were outnumbered by thousands to one. But numbers were not everything. Human tactics had evolved through centuries of warfare on Earth, where survival meant adapting quickly to changing conditions. Council military doctrine had not changed in millennia because it did not need to. Who would challenge species that had ruled the galaxy since before humans learned to use fire? Admiral Harrison called his senior staff together for a planning meeting that would determine humanity's survival. General Pete Adams, the youngest person ever to reach his rank, presented intelligence reports that painted a grim picture. The Council controlled most of the galaxy's industrial capacity. They had fleets that could destroy planets. They had weapons that humans barely understood. But they also had weaknesses that 50,000 years of unchallenged power had created. They expect us to follow their rules, Adams explained to the assembled officers. Their entire military strategy is based on controlling space lanes and supply routes. They fight like they're managing resources, not like they're trying to survive. We can use that against them. Dr. Rachel Kim, the brilliant scientist who had developed humanity's quantum communication system, offered another advantage. While the Council used slower-than-light communication for security reasons, her breakthrough allowed instant contact between any human settlements. Earth could coordinate defensive strategies across the galaxy while the Council was still sending messages. The old way. The first test of human resolve came sooner than expected. A small Council fleet approached the Kepler colony, where human families had been farming for 20 years. The lead ship transmitted a simple message: return to Council authority or face consequences. Governor Carroll Davis, a former Earth military officer, responded by activating the colony's hidden defenses and calling for help. Alex Turner's ship was the closest to respond, along with 2 other human vessels. As they jumped into the Kepler system, they found 6 Council ships in attack formation, their weapons powered and ready. The alien commander sent another message: withdraw immediately, or we will consider you hostile. Turner looked at his crew, young men and women who had volunteered to serve on the frontier. They knew this moment had been coming. The Council would not accept humanity's withdrawal without testing their willingness to fight for it. All ships, Turner transmitted to his small fleet. Defensive positions around the colony. Do not fire unless fired upon, but be ready. The standoff lasted 3 hours. Council ships moved closer to the colony while human vessels positioned themselves in the way. Neither side wanted to start a war, but neither side could back down without losing face. Finally, the alien commander made his decision. The Council ships powered down their weapons and jumped away, but not before sending a final message. This is not over. Word of the Kepler incident spread quickly through both human and alien channels. The Council had blinked first, but everyone knew it was just the beginning. On Nexus Prime, Chancellor Zephyros met with his closest advisors to plan their response. The humans had shown they would fight, but they had also shown restraint. Perhaps there was still time to end this crisis before it became a war. But on the military worlds of the hegemony, different plans were being made. General Krekstar, a creature of metal and hate who had never lost a battle, saw humanity's defiance as an opportunity. If the Council appeared weak, if they could not control one small species, then perhaps it was time for new leadership in the galaxy. The hegemony had waited centuries for such a chance. As the first day after Earth's declaration ended, the galaxy began to split into camps. Some species supported the Council out of fear or tradition. Others quietly admired humanity's courage. A few saw opportunity in the chaos that was sure to come. But everyone understood that the age of unchallenged Council rule was ending. Earth had severed ties with the Galactic Council, and the galaxy was no longer holding its breath. It was preparing for war. 6 months after Earth's declaration of independence, the first real test came from an unexpected source. The Korthak Confederation, a collection of warrior clans that had spent centuries raiding the edges of civilized space, saw opportunity in the galaxy's confusion. Their war leader, Grakhan the Destroyer, gathered his strongest clans for what he called the Great Taking. If the humans were cut off from Council protection, their colonies would be easy prey. Colonel Danny Price stood in the command bunker, beneath New Hope Colony on Kepler 442b, watching his screens as the enemy fleet dropped out of hyperspace. 47 Korthak warships, each one built for nothing but destruction, arranged themselves in attack formation above the planet where 30,000 human families had made their homes. The aliens had chosen this target carefully, believing a single mining colony would fall quickly and send a message to other human settlements. The Korthak transmitted their demands in broken human language, their voices full of the confidence that came from thousands of successful raids. Human colony surrender now. Give all metal, all machines, all weapons. We take half your people for slaves. Others live under Korthak rule. You have 1 hour to decide. Price looked at his defense team, men and women who had volunteered to protect their community when Earth's withdrawal made them all targets. Lieutenant Amy Foster, barely out of training, monitored the communications array that would call for help. Sergeant Bill Crawford, a veteran of the asteroid wars, checked the automated weapon systems that Price hoped would be enough to buy time. Captain Jane Phillips, the colony's head pilot, prepared the small fleet of mining ships that would have to serve as fighters. What the Korthak did not know was that the past 6 months had changed everything about human military doctrine. General Pete Adams had spent those months developing new strategies based on one simple fact. Humans could no longer rely on superior numbers or overwhelming firepower. They had to be smarter, faster, and more unpredictable than any enemy they faced. Dr. Rachel Kim's quantum communication breakthrough meant that Price could talk instantly with military commanders across the galaxy. Within minutes of the Korthak arrival, Earth Defense Command knew about the attack. Admiral Harrison himself was monitoring the situation from his command ship, while Captain Alex Turner's rapid response fleet raced toward Kepler 442b at maximum speed. But help was still hours away, and the Korthak were not patient. When the human hour passed without surrender, Grakhon gave the order to attack. The first wave of alien fighters screamed down through the atmosphere, their pilots howling battle cries that had terrified civilized species for generations. They expected to see humans running in panic, begging for mercy that would not come. Instead, they found a trap. Price had used the 6-month preparation period to turn his mining colony into a fortress. The same tunnels that extracted minerals from the planet's crust now hid weapon systems that erupted from hidden positions. Surface installations that looked like ordinary buildings revealed themselves as armored bunkers. The mining ships that seemed defenseless launched swarms of small drones armed with explosives. The first wave of Korthak fighters was destroyed in minutes, their pilots too shocked to adapt to tactics they had never seen before. The survivors radioed confused reports to their fleet. The humans fight like demons. They show no fear. Their weapons come from nowhere. Grakhon responded by sending his heavy assault ships, massive vessels designed to crack open planets and spill their contents into space. But as the Korthak ships descended, they found something else waiting for them. The human colony had been built around a series of underground factories that could produce weapons and equipment from raw materials. In 6 months, those factories had created defenses that even the Council had never imagined. Captain Phillips led her converted mining fleet against ships 10 times their size, using tactics that made no sense to traditional military thinking. Human pilots flew their small craft inside the Korthak formation, too close for the big ships to use their main weapons without hitting each other. They attacked engine pods and weapon systems instead of trying to destroy entire vessels. Most importantly, they worked together in ways that confused enemies used to hierarchical command structures. The battle that followed became known throughout the galaxy as the New Hope Miracle. For 3 days, a single human colony held off a Korthak fleet that had conquered dozens of worlds. The aliens threw everything they had at the planet's defenses, but every attack was met with new surprises, weapons that should not exist, tactics that violated every rule of civilized warfare, humans who fought with the desperation of cornered animals but the intelligence of master strategists. On the second day, Turner's fleet arrived to find the Korthak formation in chaos. The alien ships were damaged and confused, their communications filled with arguments between clan leaders who blamed each other for the unexpected resistance. Turner's ships added their firepower to the colony's defenses, but by then, the outcome was already decided. Dr. Sophie Hayes monitored the battle from her laboratory on Mars, analyzing every aspect of human performance for future improvements. What she discovered changed her understanding of her own species. Under extreme pressure, humans did not just fight harder. They became more creative, more cooperative, more willing to try solutions that rational analysis said would not work. It was this unpredictability that made them so effective against enemies who relied on proven methods. The end came when Grakhon himself descended to the planet's surface, leading his personal guard in what was supposed to be the final assault on the human command center. The Korthak war leader had never been defeated in personal combat, had never retreated from any battle. But when he faced Colonel Price in the tunnels beneath New Hope, he found something he had never encountered before. A human who refused to accept defeat, even when logic said it was inevitable. The fight between Price and Grakhon lasted only minutes, but the recording spread across the galaxy within hours. Council intelligence services studied every second, trying to understand how a human officer with basic training had defeated a warrior who had killed champions from a dozen species. The answer was simple but terrifying to those who ruled through strength. Price had not fought to win. He had fought to protect his people, and that made him more dangerous than any warrior fighting for glory. When Grakhon fell, his surviving clans did something that shocked the galaxy. They knelt before Price and offered him their allegiance. The Korthak respected strength above all else, and they had found something stronger than any force they had known. Price, exhausted and wounded, helped them to their feet and spoke words that would be remembered for generations. "We are not your conquerors. We are your brothers in the fight for freedom." News of the human victory spread through the galaxies. Communication networks faster than any government could control it. On council worlds, species that had never questioned their leaders began asking why humans could defeat the Korthak when council forces had failed for centuries. On independent worlds, governments that had avoided choosing sides started looking at humanity with new respect. The Ethereal Collective called an emergency session to discuss what Chancellor Zephyros called the human problem. For the first time in their existence, beings of pure energy found themselves afraid of creatures made of flesh and blood. The humans had not just won a military victory, they had inspired something far more dangerous, hope among species that had forgotten what freedom meant. Dr. Emma Stone's communication intercepts revealed the true scope of humanity's impact. Messages flew between dissatisfied species, planning their own withdrawals from council authority. The Novari sent diplomats to meet with human representatives. The Verdani began organizing resistance movements on their own worlds. Even some of the older species started questioning whether the council's way was the only way, but the victory at New Hope also brought new dangers. The hegemony's General Krekstar convinced his government that humanity posed a threat to galactic stability that could not be ignored. Hegemony fleets began moving toward human space, their intention clear to anyone who understood their military doctrine. They would not make the same mistakes as the Korthak. They would not underestimate human capabilities. They would simply overwhelm every human world with force that no amount of creativity could resist. Admiral Harrison knew that New Hope was just the beginning. The colony's victory had bought humanity time and allies, but it had also marked them as a threat that the galaxy's powers could not ignore. In his private quarters aboard the flagship Liberty, he studied star charts that showed hegemony fleets, massing just outside human territory. The next test would be far more difficult than anything they had faced before. On Earth, President White addressed the planet's population with news of the victory and warnings about what was coming. "Today we proved that humans can defend themselves against any enemy," she said, standing before cameras that would carry her words to every human settlement. "Tomorrow we will prove that freedom is worth any sacrifice." The galaxy was no longer holding its breath. It was choosing sides in a conflict that would determine whether the future belonged to those who ruled through fear or those who fought for the right to live free. 2 years after Earth's withdrawal from the Galactic Council, the galaxy had split into 3 distinct regions that could no longer pretend to coexist peacefully. The core councils still controlled the ancient heart worlds, but their authority was challenged daily by species that had watched humanity's success with growing interest. The Free Worlds Alliance emerged around Earth's influence, a loose confederation of species that had chosen independence over security. Between them lay the neutral zone, where frightened governments tried to avoid choosing sides in a conflict that seemed destined to reshape galactic civilization. President Nathan Brooks stood in the observation deck of New Geneva Station, humanity's new capital built in orbit around a garden world that had become the symbol of free cooperation. Through the transparent aluminum windows, he could see ships from 15 different species working together to expand the station's facilities. Novari crystal ships with their geometric beauty, Verdani bio-vessels that looked more grown than built, and human craft that combined function with the bold designs that had become Earth's signature. The transformation had been remarkable, but not without cost. Captain Elena Rodriguez commanded the first joint Free Worlds fleet from her flagship, the FWS Defiance, a vessel that represented everything the old council had feared. Her crew included humans, Novari, Verdani, and even a few former council, species who had abandoned their governments to fight for something they believed in. The ship itself was a fusion of technologies that should not have worked together, but somehow created something more powerful than any single species could build alone. Rodriguez looked at her tactical displays, monitoring the movements of council, forces that still outnumbered her alliance by significant margins. The hegemony had positioned their main battle fleets along the borders of free world space, while ethereal collective forces maintained careful patrols around systems they still considered their property. Neither side had made the first move toward open war, but everyone knew the peace was temporary. Dr. Ben Clark's anthropological studies from his research center on New Geneva had revealed why the Council's response to human independence had been so ineffective. The ancient species that dominated Council leadership had built their power on the assumption that civilization meant hierarchy, that order required submission to authority, that progress came through careful management by those who knew better. Humanity's success violated every principle they had used to justify their rule for 50,000 years. The Free World's Charter that President Brooks had signed represented a completely different approach to galactic government. No species could impose its will on another. No central authority could override local decisions. No military force could be used except in self-defense or to protect other alliance members from aggression. It was a radical document that made many council leaders uncomfortable, even those who had not yet chosen sides. General Chris Morgan, operating from his command center on New Geneva, coordinated defense strategies that had evolved far beyond anything the old Earth military had imagined. The Alliance could not match Council firepower in direct confrontation, so they had developed tactics based on mobility, cooperation, and the kind of creative thinking that came naturally to species fighting for their freedom rather than following. orders from distant bureaucrats. The economic transformation had been equally dramatic. Dr. Oliver Kim's medical advances, freed from council restrictions on research, had eliminated diseases that had plagued dozens of species for centuries. Engineer Victoria Bell's energy systems had brought prosperity to resource-poor worlds by making them self-sufficient rather than dependent on trade with the core systems. Most importantly, the sharing of knowledge between alliance species had accelerated technological progress in ways the Council's careful control had never allowed. But not everyone was happy with the changes. On Harmony Station, the Council's remaining leadership struggled to maintain authority over species that were increasingly questioning the wisdom of their ancient rulers. Chancellor Zephyros found his meetings interrupted by younger representatives, who asked uncomfortable questions about why the Council had never achieved what the free worlds had accomplished in just 2 years. The Threnody Empire faced internal rebellion as their subject species looked at the Alliance's success and wondered why they had accepted domination for so long. Ambassador Vex High's reports to his government grew more desperate each month as trade routes shifted toward free world ports, and young Threnody began emigrating to Alliance worlds where they could pursue their own interests instead of serving imperial needs. The most dramatic change came from an unexpected source. The Korthak clans, still led by warriors who had sworn allegiance to Colonel Price after their defeat at New Hope, had become the Alliance's most effective military force. Under human leadership, their natural fighting abilities were channeled into protecting the weak instead of preying on them. Former raiders now escorted merchant ships and defended colony worlds with the same ferocity they had once used for conquest. Captain Troy Adams piloted his exploration vessel toward the Galactic Rim, leading a joint expedition that included scientists from 8 different species. Their mission was to map new hyperspace routes that would connect Alliance worlds without passing through Council territory. But they were also searching for something else, other species that might be ready to join. The growing confederation of free worlds. What they found changed everything. In the outer spiral arms, beyond the reach of Council authority, dozens of species had been developing their own civilizations without any contact with the galactic core. Some were more advanced than anything in Council space. Others were just beginning to explore their own star systems. All of them were curious about the alliance that had defied the galaxy's ancient powers and survived. Dr. Rachel Kim's analysis of these discoveries revealed the true scope of Council limitations. The Ethereals and their allies had controlled galactic civilization for so long that they had forgotten how to adapt to new situations. Their technology was powerful but rigid. Their society was stable but stagnant. They had created an empire that could maintain itself indefinitely but could not grow or change when faced with unexpected challenges. The Alliance's flexibility gave it advantages that no one had anticipated. When the Void Hunters, an ancient threat that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia, emerged from deep space to test the new political situation, they found themselves facing not a rigid Council response, but a coordinated effort by species working together by choice rather than command. The Hunters' traditional tactics, designed to exploit the weaknesses of hierarchical military structures, proved useless against forces that could adapt and innovate in real time. President Brooks met with Alliance leaders in New Geneva's Council chambers, a circular room where no species held a position of authority over others. The discussions were often heated, as beings from different worlds argued about the best response to Council pressure and the growing threats from militant species, like the hegemony. But the arguments themselves proved the Alliance's strength. Unlike council meetings where ancient species imposed their will on younger ones, these debates involved equals working toward solutions they could all support. The breakthrough came when the crystal-based resonants, who maintained the hyperspace routes that made faster-than-light travel possible, announced their withdrawal from council oversight. Their decision was prompted by decades of frustration with council restrictions on expanding the route network, combined with admiration for the Alliance's success in developing new technologies. With the resonants joining the free worlds, trade and communication across Alliance space became faster and more efficient than anything the Council could match. The Council's response was swift but predictable. Ethereal forces moved to occupy the resonant home system, claiming the route maintenance. Facilities were too important to galactic stability to be controlled by rebels and terrorists. The occupation was presented as a temporary measure to protect galactic commerce, but everyone understood it was an attempt to strangle the Alliance's economy. Elena Rodriguez received her orders from Alliance Command within hours of the Council's action. Her fleet, reinforced by Korthak warriors and Novari crystal ships, jumped toward the resonant system with instructions to liberate the occupied worlds. It would be the Alliance's first direct military confrontation with Council forces, a test that would determine whether their cooperation could survive against the galaxy's most powerful military. The battle for the resonant system became known as the moment when galactic politics changed forever. Rodriguez's mixed fleet used tactics that no Council commander had ever faced, combining human creativity with alien capabilities in ways that traditional military doctrine said were impossible. Korthak warriors provided brutal close combat support, while Novari crystal ships offered technological advantages that complemented human strategic thinking. But the real victory was not military. When the battle ended with Council forces in retreat, the recordings of Alliance species fighting together as equals spread across the galaxy's communication networks. Species that had remained neutral saw proof that the Council could be defeated. 5 years after Earth severed ties with the Galactic Council, Ambassador Claire Davis stood in the Assembly Hall of New Geneva Station, looking out at representatives from over 200 species. The massive chamber buzzed with conversations in dozens of languages, but the universal translators could not capture the sense of hope that filled the air. What had begun as humanity's desperate gamble for independence had become something no one could have predicted: a new form of galactic civilization based on cooperation rather than domination. The transformation had not been easy or without cost. 3 major wars had shaped the galaxy during those 5 years, each one testing whether the ideals of the Free Worlds Alliance could survive against forces determined to destroy them. The Hegemony War had lasted 18 months and cost millions of lives before General Krextar's forces were finally defeated by Alliance fleets that fought with the desperation of people protecting their homes. The Council Restoration War had seen ancient powers attempt to reclaim their authority through military force, only to discover that species who had tasted freedom would not easily return to servitude. The Void Hunter incursion had brought external threats that forced former enemies to work together or face extinction. President Claire Davis, Nathan Brooks's successor, had guided the Alliance through its darkest moments and its greatest triumphs. Her administration had overseen the integration of former Council species who had abandoned their governments to join the growing Confederation of Free Worlds. She had negotiated the complex agreements that allowed dozens of different species to work together while maintaining their individual cultures and beliefs. Most importantly, she had proven that democracy could function on a galactic scale when based on mutual respect rather than imposed authority. The old Galactic Council still existed, but as a shadow of its former power, controlling fewer than 300 worlds compared to the 1,000-plus systems that had once acknowledged their authority. Chancellor Zephyros and his fellow Ethereals maintained their capital on Nexus Prime, but their influence barely extended beyond the core systems where ancient species clung to traditions that seemed increasingly irrelevant to younger civilizations. Dr. Oliver Kim's medical revolution had eliminated diseases that had plagued organic species for millennia, while his research into cybernetic integration had offered new hope to mechanical races like the hegemony remnants who had chosen cooperation over conquest. Engineer Victoria Bell's energy innovations had transformed entire sectors, making it possible for primitive worlds to achieve technological advancement without depending on trade with advanced civilizations. The economic transformation had been even more dramatic than the political changes. Free trade between alliance species had created prosperity that exceeded anything achieved under council regulation. Human creativity combined with alien technologies had produced innovations that solved problems no single species could have addressed alone. Most importantly, the sharing of knowledge and resources had made it possible for member worlds to develop according to their own needs and desires rather than following approved templates. Captain Troy Adams returned from his latest exploration mission with news that changed everyone's understanding of galactic geography. His surveys of the Outer Rim had discovered civilizations that were more advanced than anything in Council space, species that had developed incredible technologies, while remaining completely isolated from galactic politics. Some of these distant powers had expressed interest in establishing contact with the Alliance, impressed by reports of a confederation that respected independence and encouraged innovation. General Chris Morgan reviewed intelligence reports from his command center, analyzing the ongoing changes in what remained of Council territory. Former member species continued to withdraw from Council authority, either joining the Alliance or declaring complete independence. The Threnody Empire had split into dozens of smaller governments, some hostile to human influence, but others eager to establish trade relationships with Alliance worlds. Even the proud Zalarians had begun sending diplomatic missions to New Geneva, though they insisted any cooperation would be between equals rather than the subordinate relationship they had maintained with the Council. The success story that impressed the galaxy most was the transformation of the Korthak clans. Under Alliance guidance, the former raiders had become the Confederation's most effective peacekeeping force, using their warrior traditions to protect trade routes and defend weak species from aggression. Colonel Danny Price, now a general in the Alliance military, commanded mixed units where former enemies fought side by side against threats to galactic stability. Dr. Sophie Hayes's research into human psychology had revealed why the Alliance model worked where other attempts at galactic cooperation had failed. Humans, she discovered, had an unusual combination of traits that made them effective mediators between species that might otherwise find cooperation impossible. Their adaptability allowed them to understand different cultures without losing their own identity. Their optimism made them believe that problems could be solved rather than simply managed. Most importantly, their experience with diversity on Earth had taught them that differences could be strengths rather than sources of conflict. The Alliance's military forces reflected this philosophy. Captain Elena Rodriguez commanded fleets, where Novari crystal ships provided advanced sensors, Verdani biovessels offered self-repair capabilities, former Korthak warriors supplied close combat expertise, and human crews contributed tactical flexibility and strategic innovation. These mixed forces had proven more effective than any single species military because they could adapt to any situation and support each other's weaknesses. But the Alliance's greatest achievement was not military or economic. It was the proof that galactic civilization could evolve beyond the rigid hierarchies that had dominated for 50,000 years. In the new Geneva Council chambers, species that had been enemies for millennia worked together to solve problems that affected them all. Former council members sat alongside rebels who had defied galactic law. Ancient powers negotiated as equals with civilizations that had barely achieved spaceflight. The Void Hunter threat had been the ultimate test of this cooperation. When the ancient predators emerged from deep space with fleets designed to harvest organic life from entire sectors, they expected to face the same divided response that had made previous incursions successful. Instead, they found themselves confronting a coordinated defense that combined the strengths of hundreds of species working together by choice rather than command. Ambassador Davis addressed the assembly with words that would be remembered across the galaxy. 5 years ago, humanity made a choice that seemed like madness to those who ruled through fear and impossible to those who had forgotten what freedom meant. Today, we gather not as subjects of some distant authority, but as partners in building a future where every species can determine its own destiny. The audience included beings that would have been inconceivable allies when Earth first declared independence. Former hegemony commanders sat next to peace activists from pacifist species. Council loyalists who had switched sides shared data with rebels who had fought against galactic authority for generations. Young representatives from species that had never known anything but council rule listened to stories of the liberation, wars with excitement and determination. Dr. Ben Clark's historical analysis showed that the galaxy had entered a new age of exploration and innovation that surpassed even the legendary periods when ancient civilizations first reached the stars. With the restrictions of council oversight removed, species were free to pursue technologies and social experiments that had been forbidden for millennia. Some of these developments would fail, but others would create possibilities that no central authority could have imagined. The economic data supported his conclusions. Trade between Alliance worlds had increased by over 300% in 5 years, while scientific cooperation had produced technological advances that were being shared freely among member species. Most significantly, the Alliance had achieved this prosperity without the resource wars and territorial conflicts that had characterized much of galactic history. President Davis concluded her address with a challenge that would define the Alliance's future. We have proven that cooperation is stronger than domination, that diversity is more valuable than uniformity, that freedom is worth any sacrifice required to achieve and maintain it. Now we must decide what kind of galaxy we want to build with these principles. The response came from species across the assembly hall as representatives stood to pledge their continued commitment to the Alliance's ideals. The Novari ambassador spoke of crystal harmony achieved through voluntary cooperation. The Verdani delegate described the growth that came from nurturing individual potential rather than forcing conformity. Even the former Korthak War leader, his scars marking him as a veteran of the old ways, declared his clan's loyalty to the alliance that had shown them honor could be found in protection rather than conquest. Admiral Jake Harrison, now an elder, statesman whose decision to sever ties with the council had started the transformation, watched the ceremonies from his retirement home on Earth.